Friday afternoon. Jesse Montano here, Guerilla Sports. It's my favorite time of day. We get to talk about hockey. We get to talk about the Avs. And look, if you've followed my work for the last couple of years, thank you, first of all. Second, you know that like this time of year just kills me. I was actually on the phone with someone the other day, and we were talking about how it makes zero sense that the NHL does everything at the end of the season within like 10 days. The Stanley Cup final ends, you have the draft, you have free agency, everything all happens in like a 10-day stretch. And then it's nothing. Like take some cues from some of the other leagues around. Spread that shit out a bit. Give us some stuff to talk about throughout the summer. But hey, look, you know, it is what it is. We are we're humming along here at Guerilla Sports, and the Avs aren't completely leaving us out to dry. Some newsworthy stuff coming through this week. We are going to, of course, talk about Pavel Francouz, Andrew Cogliano getting official titles themselves this week. We're going to talk about Cal Ritchie, maybe where he could fit with this Avs roster, should he make it out of camp. But I do want to start with the interview that Alan Walsh did on his podcast talking about the Jonathan Drouin extension here in Colorado. I think this is not only the best contract that was signed in the NHL this summer, best value deal signed in the league so far this year, but I think it's also maybe one of the most important deals, definitely the most important deal for the Avs to get done, and maybe one of the most key component deals in the NHL so far this season. So I want to talk about it because basically what Alan Walsh said this morning, the podcast released this morning, it was recorded over the weekend. What he said basically follows the exact storyline that we all kind of thought, that this was a situation that they recognized was a good fit. The Avs recognized was a good fit, and they all wanted to find a way to get it over the finish line. So Alan Walsh, look, we talked a lot about Alan Walsh in the lead up to this deal getting done. And we were all a little bit concerned that this is a tough negotiator. This is an agent who always makes sure he gets the most for his client, does right by his client, as all agents should. But Alan Walsh isn't a guy that's known for giving a lot of hometown discounts or, you know, throwing teams a bone because they're up against it. He understands the value of his work, what his clients are able to do, and he's pretty notorious for making sure that those players are being correctly compensated. So we were all saying, gosh, if the Avs can negotiate Jonathan Drouin and Alan Walsh down below $5 million, you're feeling really good about this, that where that money comes in. So when it came in at a 1-year, $2.5 million deal, one, I was floored. And two, but it gave the perception immediately of there's probably something else going on here. There's probably more layers to this. There's probably more conversation that was being had. So when Alan Walsh talked about the Jonathan Drouin negotiation on his podcast this week, some of that stuff was brought to light a little bit. And he did outright say, and it was honestly my favorite part of what he said about this. Alan Walsh said that he's got a philosophy that he tries to pass on to his players, you know, his clients, and just really that he said he tries to apply it in life. And excuse my language here, he said the philosophy is don't fuck with happy. When you find a situation that makes sense, is good for you, is good for your mental health, is good for your family, the team wants you there. And he did. He mentioned multiple times the very well documented relationship between Jonathan Drouin and Nathan MacKinnon. And he described that relationship and that friendship as special on his show. And Alan Walsh, before he got into any of like the details and the numbers they landed at in the 1 year and things like that, he really drove home that this was maybe a bit of a unique situation in that you do not often find player team fits this cohesive. And it's rare to find that type of relationship between, two players that are that close of friends who grew up together, who have had great success playing together in the past. And Alan Walsh basically said, like, we talked and we wanted to stick to philosophy. Don't fuck with Happy. This is too good of a situation to just walk away from. Now, obviously, they did go out and they were able to test the market and see what the value was out there for Jonathan Drouin. And he doesn't get into, obviously, any of the other offers were. Again, there were reports the New York Rangers, Boston Bruins, St. Louis Blues were all in on Jonathan Drouin. But really the point that he kept driving home, again, before he got into the one-year stuff, and we're going to talk about that, he really wanted to make sure that the point was being driven home that this was just a marriage that made way too much sense. And again, I think that was something that we were all saying, man, if you're the Avs, you're really hoping that that's how they're going to feel. That they're going to feel that this was just too right of a fit for Jonathan Drouin to go play anywhere else. So, check. We got that. We know it's a great fit. And Alan Walsh also mentioned beyond the relationship with Nathan MacKinnon, he said that the relationship that Jonathan Drouin was able to build in that Avalanche locker room this year, he said everybody loved Jonathan Drouin. And Jonathan Drouin loved being in that room, loved being a part of the culture and the coaching staff. It was just something that when the deal was signed, when the deal was signed last summer to bring Jonathan Drouin to Colorado, I think we all knew that culturally it was going to be a good fit. I think we were all just saying, like, gosh, can he find that, the play? Can it translate to quality play on the ice? Well, it ended up translating to Jonathan Drouin's best year ever in the NHL. And so I think the culture fit, the on-ice results came, and it just made too much sense. Now, the one part of this that I think was maybe the most surprising for most was, got something in my eye there, the term on this deal. 1 year, 2.5 was already shocking enough. Then you add on the fact that it was a 1 year extension. And a lot of us started immediately speculating that this is probably tied to the uncertainty with Val Nichushkin and Gabe Landeskog. And talking about the fact that this is likely hey, let's, contracts in the drawer, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, let's revisit this down the road. Alan Walsh brought that up right away. He said, look, it's very well documented, very public situation with Val Nichushkin. A lot of uncertainty there. Also, uncertainty around Gabe Landeskog's health as he's trying to come back after not playing for the last 2 years. When is he going to be able to come back? How healthy is he going to be? And how is that going to affect the salary cap? In addition to those two things, Alan Walsh also mentioned that we have to wait. We know some rough projections for what that salary cap is going to be next year, but it's not totally clear where exactly it's going to fall. Alan Walsh mentioned, we want to wait to see where that salary cap is going to land next year. Are we going to get the little bit above projection boost like the NHL is seeing this year? And then Alan Walsh came right out and said, we all thought this 1 year, $2.5 million deal made sense, and we're going to revisit in January to see about getting that long-term deal done. I just keep going back to, this is an unbelievable bit of business, not only for Chris McFarland and the Avalanche, I think on all sides. I think this is a classic example of an agent doing right by his player and his client, doing right by an organization that has met them halfway, right? And everybody's happy. Everybody comes out of this feeling good about where they are at, with the team, where it's going in the future, et cetera, et cetera. I honestly really liked hearing Alan Walsh's side, because there's a part of you that had to wonder when this deal got done, okay, is this going to lead to some ill will? Hey, I took a team discount and you guys aren't, this sounds like everyone's on the same page. Everyone understands this is too good of a fit for both sides. We needed the Avs. If you're the Avs, you're saying to Alan Walsh and Jonathan Drouin's camp, we need the year or at least a few months to get a little bit more clarity on what's happening next. But we want him here long-term. Help us do that to keep him here long-term. It's a deal that made sense for everybody. We were speculating on that before, but now hearing it from Alan Walsh's side after hearing from Chris McFarland last week, it just drives it home. This is something that everyone wanted to get done, and that's why even after Jonathan Drouin had an opportunity to test the market, they still found a way to get this over the finish line. I think it's a great feel-good story for this year. I would have loved to see Jonathan Drouin be a finalist for the Bill Masterton award for, it's essentially comeback player of the year in the NHL. I thought he had a fantastic year, and given everything that he's been able to overcome the last couple seasons after having to step away from the game to seek help with his mental health, I'm happy to be able to cover this guy every single day. Jonathan Drouin has been an absolute treat every time we've gone into the locker room to talk with him. So happy he's sticking around, and it was great to hear Alan Walsh's perspective on how the negotiations went. So it's the feel-good story we all hoped it would be. Now you just got to, if you're the Avalanche, hope that Jonathan Drouin continues that progress from last year and takes his play up even another level, now having a full year with this organization under his belt. I mentioned off the top, part of the reason why it was so important for Jonathan Drouin's deal to get done is because the Avs are looking for solutions at forward, being a little bit cap-strapped, and one of those solutions they're hoping this year is going to be rookie forward Cal Ritchie, who did sign his ELC last year. 3-year deal, your standard ELC deal. And this is the question that we're getting a lot right here. What do you ultimately see happening the upcoming season? There it is. What do you ultimately see happening this upcoming season with Cal Ritchie? Do you think Ross Colton gets moved? So here's going to be my cop-out Ross Colton answer before we get into all the Cal Ritchie stuff. I do think Ross Colton gets moved one way or the other, whether it be moved to another team or moved to a different line. I think that's where this season is going to start. And I actually think the two names that Brandon brought up there in that comment, Cal Ritchie and Ross Colton, those are the two that we're going to be looking at a lot in this conversation here. So Cal Ritchie gets his ELC, and that's going to give him an opportunity to make this roster. Now, if you guys remember earlier in the week, we talked about the fact that because of the CHL agreement with the NHL, a player like Cal Ritchie, because of his age, can only play in the CHL or in the NHL with the Colorado Avalanche. He cannot play in the American Hockey League with the Colorado Eagles. He cannot play in the ECHL with the Utah Grizzlies. So I think this is a bad rule because it's Cal Ritchie, where he's at in his development. He dominated the OHL last year. He dominated, folks. He has nothing left to gain by going back for his last year of major junior eligibility. There's nothing for him to gain. You want to see him start to step up against the level of competition that he's playing against. And to me, the perfect fit for that is starting him in the American Hockey League with the Eagles. But again, you can't do that because of an agreement with the CHL and the NHL. So what that means is that I'm looking at this and the fact the Avs are willing to give him an ELC as they want to see if he can be an impact player in the NHL this year. We talk about it so much. You need ELCs, entry-level contracts, entering your lineup to stay competitive as a contender. You need cheap contracts for impactful players to be in your lineup. And that's what I think the Avs are hoping to maybe get out of Cal Ritchie this year. Now, they see him as a center. He is a center. They see him as a center in the NHL. Chris McFarland even told us 2 weeks ago in Vegas that they even potentially see Cal Ritchie as the future 2C, which is where Casey Middlestat plays right now. So to me, if you're trying to get Cal Ritchie into the lineup this year, you want him playing at center. You probably also don't really want him playing on the fourth line, limited minutes. Those are more kind of your shutdown players, penalty killers, things like that. You probably want him playing with a little bit of skill, or at least some players that are going to help him generate some offense and play a little bit north. You're not going to immediately drop him in the lineup over Casey Middlestat at 2C, who you just locked up for multiple years and traded Bowen Byram to acquire. So to me, the natural fit would be the third line center, where Ross Colton is currently slated to start next season. When I was answering Brandon's question here in the chat about do we think Ross Colton gets moved, and I said yes, one way or the other, I think the Avs are either going to move on from Ross Colton via trade to open up a little bit more flexibility for them on the cap and then plug Cal Ritchie in right there, or what I actually think is more likely right now is they move Ross Colton to the wing, either on that second or third line, and then you put Cal Ritchie in the middle on your third line as a true center. Keep in mind, Ross Colton is a center, has played center in the past and played a lot of center for the Avs last year, but that was not the primary position that he played when he arrived in Colorado. They brought him in because they said, this is a guy that we can make into a center because he's got experience doing it. And I thought he was fine. But I know I've talked to several people that said they liked him better on the wing. Okay, so if you put Cal Ritchie, if you give him a shot at 3C, well, you're not just putting him in a grinding role on the fourth line. You could keep, I don't know, you go like Logan O'Connor and Ross Colton with him. Do you move Ross Colton up to the second line and go Miles Wood, LOC? I think it's going to open up some options for you. Not to mention, if Gabe Landeskog is able to come back in any reasonable amount of time, well, then there's an extra winger that you could maybe put next to Cal Ritchie on that third line. Shelter Gabe Landeskog's minutes a little bit as he rehabs and works his way back into that lineup and works his way back up to NHL speed after 2 years. Or you're putting, you're bumping a guy back down like Ross Colton. Then let's really get fun with the hypotheticals. If Val Nichushkin and Gabe Landeskog both come back, one, the Avs are going to need to do some money gymnastics. But point being, you are now talking about having one of Val Nichushkin, Arturi Lehkonen, or Gabe Landeskog guaranteed on that wing with Cal Ritchie, plus maybe a guy like Ross Colton if you find a way to make all the money work. Suddenly, that's a pretty good third line, and you're looking at your center depth of Nathan McKinnon, Casey Middlestat, Cal Ritchie. What I just laid out to you, one of those scenarios, whether it be Ross Colton playing on his wing, Gabe Landeskog playing on his wing, whatever, I think we see one of those play out for at least 9 games. They gave Cal Ritchie an ELC. I think unless he comes out and clearly shows in camp he can't hang, clearly shows he can't handle it, I think they're going to give him 9 games. I think the Avalanche organization and their amateur scouting department and their coaching staff and probably management is looking at what Cal Ritchie did in the OHL last year and saying, yeah, we're good. We don't need to see him do that again this year. We want to see if he can play pro. He looked a clear step ahead, clearly more polished than anyone else on the ice last week at development camp. Like, I think it's the right move to give him a look. I think it's a player who's important to your organization. And given where the Avs are at, getting Cal Ritchie to jump into the NHL and let's say give 30 to 40 points, I don't think he's asking for a lot. That would be like an outstanding rookie year for Cal Ritchie. If he could find a way to be 5 to 10 goals, 20, let's say anywhere from 5 to 15 goals, which I think would be outstanding on the high end, and then anywhere from 18 to 25 assists, playing in a sheltered minutes role, I think you're feeling really good about that. And then suddenly going into next year, you've got a kid who has a year of NHL experience under his belt, and now you're looking for him to be more of a, not a 20, 30, 35 point guy, but more of a 45, 50, 55 point guy. I think the Avs would be doing themselves a favor to give Cal Ritchie at least a 9-game trial in the NHL. And if he clearly can't handle it, send him back to the OHL to play for the Oshawa Generals and go put up 200 points. That's fine. I think he needs to get a look. I think the Avs agree with that, and I think they understand not only do we need him as, Cal Ritchie the player, and Cal Ritchie the hopeful future 2C, we need some cheap contracts for impactful players. I'm going to be anxious to see how Cal Ritchie looks at training camp. To me, this barring Gabe Landeskog suddenly showing up and getting on the ice for training camp, something like that happening, this is going to be my number one storyline to follow at camp, which I know feels a long ways away. But we're about 8 weeks. That's not bad. So this will be a fun one to follow. Cal Ritchie, I'm sure, is taking his training to the next level right now in his summer program. We'll keep an eye on what happens with Cal Ritchie. Last thing I wanted to talk about here, guys, it's the thing I mentioned first, and this is more of just some quick updates because we did touch on it earlier in the week. Pavel Francouz and Andrew Cogliano, we knew that they were joining the organization in what was at the time when we were talking about it, undefined roles. And we were even told by Chris McFarland that they were trying to get a sense of what it was exactly that they wanted Andrew Cogliano to do. They gave him kind of a lot of different hats that he could wear, and it felt like a little bit of a let's find what works for us here. Well, they settled on it. Andrew Cogliano named the special assistant to the general manager, following in the footsteps of Jason Spezza in Pittsburgh. And Pavel Francouz has officially been named a goaltending scout. He did tell members of the media last week that while he wasn't officially an amateur scout, he helped the Avs goaltending department all last year with some of their European scouting. Said that he knows Kluche, one of their goaltending draft picks from this year, maybe better than his own family. So it's nice to see those two get officially designated roles. I saw them both at development camp last week, was able to talk with Cogs out at the draft. I know he's super excited to be, sticking around the game, sticking with the organization. And I think it's great that Andrew Cogliano and the culture fit that he can bring, not necessarily even the culture fit, but the culture that he helped cultivate here in Colorado, keeping him around to help, I think, kind of keep that alive will be a great thing. And having him being involved with what Chris McFarland is doing and, potentially even working him into a larger role with that in the future. I mentioned it once on this show before. I went around and did a poll of players 2 seasons ago in the Avs locker room of which of your teammates do you think is the most likely to end up a coach? Andrew Cogliano was the most popular answer there. And then for Pavel Francouz, this to me feels like he's wanting to stay overseas in Czechia for right now, where he's from, which I totally understand. But having him on as a goaltending scout, having him involved in development camp, feels to me a little bit like it's going to be a slow process, but they're building towards Pavel Francouz potentially being more involved with the organization, potentially even here in Colorado. Now, look, I'm purely speculating on that, but I do think that's the vibe I get from this hire a little bit, making him a goaltending scout. He'll spend, I'm sure, the majority of the season over in Europe, but my guess is the Avs are going to be trying their hardest to lure him over to Colorado as much as they possibly can. And you guys know me. I've talked about it before. Pavel Francouz is I think my favorite player that I've covered so far. So any more FaceTime that we can get with Pavel Francouz, I am all in favor of. I just saw one last thing that I didn't prep Jay for that I wanted to just mention. Oh, the Beauty League is going on in Minnesota right now, and Sam Malinsky scored the first goal of the season. For people that don't know, the Beauty League is it's an adult league that takes place in the summers in Minnesota, but it's reserved for high-end players. NHL, AHL, Division I college, and I think you even have a few major junior kids that get sprinkled in there. Or if you play, overseas in the KHL, but you're American, you're Canadian, you come back to North America in the summer. I do also believe there's a large contingent of PWHL players playing this year as well. So if you guys are looking for highlights of some high-end hockey and stuff like that, You can check it out. Sam Malinsky scored a pretty sweet goal. Avalanche defenseman kicked off the scoring for the Beauty League in Minnesota this past week. Whew. That's it, Jay. That's it for this week. We're gonna pack it up. We'll be back on Monday. We'll start the day off with the Daily Show, and then we'll kick right over to this. We got one more comment that came in here we'll get to real fast. Love the Cogs and Frankie hire. Great locker room guys. Cogsy helped build the winning culture, and Frankie's a great guy to have in the org as well. What Andrew Cogliano did for the organization culture-wise, I don't know if we have fully talked about yet, and maybe we'll do a little bit of a deep dive into that next week of just the impact that Andrew Cogliano truly had on this organization, despite coming in as a trade deadline acquisition. And I completely agree with the comment there. I think keeping him around is going to be massively beneficial for this organization. And Frankie is just a great guy. That's going to do it, guys. Jay's running the board as always, doing just an unbelievable job. Absolutely crushed it this week. He was on a lot of shows and suffered a heartbreaking loss himself in the Euro Cup. So he fought through it. He's a battler this week. He's staring at me for even bringing it up. I shouldn't have done that. That was my fault. I shouldn't have done that. Thanks so much for hanging out, guys. I'm Jesse Montano. This is Guerilla Sports. We'll talk to you on Monday. Have a good one.